We've had a little change in the asylum here. The inmates have rushed the guard tower, and now the asylum belongs to us. So tonight we're calling the shot, and it's just the chief technical officer Dieter, flight attendant Diane, and myself. And we have a fairly loose itinerary. We're not going to hit you with a lot of stuff, but we have questions from you that we have not got to, and in just a little bit we're going to get to those and start answering questions that are pertinent, and hopefully more if they come in. But right now I'm going to send it back over to Dieter, who's going to tell you about some of the upcoming scheduling things and the basic stuff, and then I'll start answering with a primary question tonight. We'll just go from there.
All right. Well, thanks, Captain Eric. I mean, at that rate, I think the asylum is safe for the next little while. And for those of you who are wondering what in the world you tuned into, this is Fearless Flight Live, our weekly live show for anyone and everyone who is nervous or afraid to fly, or as our he is actually on an airplane right now. Captain Ron he's still alive and well. I want to send this out, and he is right now on his way en route from LAX to Charles de Gaulle in Paris, and hopefully next week he'll be able to tune in for the show. Otherwise, we're still running the asylum for another week. And so Fearless Flight Live, our weekly live show. We also have a Facebook group, which is almost 1,100 members strong. And if you haven't joined yet, totally make sure that you request to join. It's Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather. And we've got I was just looking through just before the show, and we got some great successes actually to celebrate. So definitely want you to hear those. And we have people who have questions, and many of our members are really great in sharing their own personal experience. So totally check it out. And one of the things that maybe we're going to get to, we do have 2 dates for flights from Phoenix as well as Burbank later this year in September. We're flying from Phoenix to Burbank and back in our cleared for takeoff 301. That's on September 10th. And I'm going to put the link later in the comments as well. And then on September 17th, we're flying from Burbank to Sacramento and back. And if lots of you are coming and joining, then you might actually get either Captain Eric and flight attendant Diane, and maybe even me at some point when I make it back down there. So with that, Captain Eric, we do have a question that came up, and so I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Well, it was a great question, and credit to our viewer, Tracy Solis. She asked it of me the other day, and I thought, well, that's funny. I don't think we've ever talked about this before. And she goes, what happens inspection wise into the airplane if the airplane experiences a hard landing? And so I thought, well, we'll address this. And what is a hard landing? What happens? She goes, I know if I drive my car very fast over a speed bump, like 60 miles an hour, there's going to be damage. So if the pilots really hit the runway, what happens? Well, I'm going to split this into 2 parts. The older days, the older analog days, non-recording days, which are the 60s, 70s, and into the mid 90s, and then the digital age. And the older days, when the airplane wasn't recording what the pilots were doing to it, it was kind of a funnier thing. The hard landing would be only as perceived by the pilots, and there would be a conflict of interest of whether or not they would call the mechanics and write it up and admit to possibly doing damage to the airplane and inspect it, balanced with them hopefully maybe getting away with something, but feeling pretty guilty about handing a possible damaged airplane to their friends. So there was there was a nebulous sort of set of interests going on at once there. And the flight attendants, of course, from back in the days had legendary comments and hijinks that they would shred the pilots with when they would do such a thing. And as Ron texted back earlier today, he says a good landing is one that you could walk away from. And a great landing is one when you can use the airplane again. But when the airplane would hit the ground pretty hard, a couple of the classic responses were from the flight attendants of the day. Response one would be to enter the cockpit and close the cockpit door behind them, and then yank their pantyhose down around their ankles and wait to see if either one of the pilots happened to notice this. However, a lot of times that sort of exhibitionism would go unnoticed because the pilots would know exactly why the flight attendants were there. And when they entered, they would both just be sitting in the seat, pointing at the other guy, trying to dodge the blame, not interested in the nudity. And one of the other fabulous cracks from this classic stewardesses, which they were at the time, or stewardi, was they would get on the interphone in some rendition in a very nice voice, say, hello, Captain. I wondered if you could call maintenance for me because my IUD came flying out and it went down into the galley drain and I don't think I'm going to be able to fish it out by myself. So if you could call the mechanics, that would be swell. So this was
I have one.
And then I'll take a break because this is limited by the flight attendant's ingenuity and ability to insult, and her being out there for a while, she's developing it, and her friends do too. So one of her friends.
Number one, if we have a landing like that, and I'm forward when we open the main cabin door, and then we open the flight, or they unlock, and then we open the flight deck door, I will usually peer in and say, "That was a really nice controlled crash landing, guys." And so they know. How's everybody back there? Well, they're okay, fine, as much as I can assess at that point. And then one of the other flight attendants has made it onto the internet a while back, said that she was really kind of tired of these brand new baby FOs, the first officer, with these really, really hard landings. And that was not how she imagined getting her back blown out by a pilot. So there's a lot of risque commentary that goes back and forth, which is, part of, I suppose, gallows humor. But, we have ways of getting kind of around that.
So I'll jump back into the digital age now, moving forward into the newer airplanes. In the mid 90s, after Al Gore invented the internet, and then moving forward, the airplanes were all designed, all these new gens with ability to record darn near everything that the airplane was doing and transmit it to the company and to the manufacturer at the same time. So when the same scenario would happen, the pilots didn't need to sit there and wonder, oh boy, should we write that up? That was pretty stiff. I don't know. They would get a less than charming message from maintenance advising them that a mechanic was going to meet them at the gate, because the mechanic would have all the information already. They were already trapped, and the mechanic would come out and the checklist, they would have an exact checklist and flow chart for what they were going to do. And fixing stuff takes mechanic brilliance, but they have had a checklist just like we do, and they would know the exact rate in feet per minute that the airplane hit the ground, and they know what's out of the envelope of really uncomfortable to potentially damaging, and they would start just right down the flow chart, checking 1, 2, 3, and then it would say, well, if item 1, 2, or 3 is damaged, then check this, that, or the other. And surprisingly or not, the first thing to usually take damage is not in the landing gear. It's usually up front in the nose where the radio racks and batteries are. It will bust battery and radio rack retention straps. And so the first thing they'll do is drop nose gear doors and access panels into the nose and start looking in there if the landing's been hard. And they'll usually come up and have their own insults for the pilot, saying, well, guys, if you haven't been able to move your hands yet and put this in the logbook, then I would suggest you do that right away. And in case you were looking for the right kind of pros, such as a little stiff, kind of firm, or really effing hard, I will tell you right here digitally that you hit the ground at 622.5 feet per minute, which really must hurt. So if you're looking for a number, you could enter that for me while I go downstairs and see which parts we do or do not need to replace. So that's landing gear inspections in the new gen. And interesting what Tracy brought up, worrying about the landing gears. The structural damage from a hard landing will be almost last in the gear area. That is so strong. The airplane can almost hit the ground hard enough to pound it up through the wings. It's other stuff attached to the airplane that gets hurt first. So that's my hard landing answer, and I hope that will be satisfactory. If it's not, send in some other stuff, and I'll throw it over to Dieter and Diane, because we had some other questions for tonight that were important.
Yeah, and before we get to the first question for Diane, I want to share my screen because our fearless leader has just sent me a selfie, and I wanted to share that. Let me just, all right. Are we sharing here or?
Yeah, but it's a dark screen.
Yeah, dark screen.
Yeah.
There he is.
Oh, there he is. Oh, nice.
So
I totally dream about flying like that.
I've never
Yeah, so-
gone through a first class compartment in a 777-8. Never even seen it. Only pictures.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, for anybody who's been in those airplanes, it's a beautiful, beautiful airplane. So I think his flight, he's flying from LAX to Paris. So I think that he will enjoy it. So enough of that. Okay, next question for Diane. And that's a great question. I mean, it might bring up some trigger moments for some of you, but the question is, why is the brace position the best position for emergency landings?
Right.
Diane, why is that?
They all of the people that know way more about this kind of stuff than I do, than most all of us do, have done all the research and the testing, kind of like along with the crash test dummies, in automobiles, to imagine, recreate under different kinds of circumstances what positions will provide the safest outcome, the best outcome for our passengers. So when you look at the passenger safety card, the PSC, and you see all the different brace positions, those have been very, very carefully researched and printed out for you, so that and there are several different brace positions that you will see in the card, and I do always urge my passengers to look at the card to review those brace positions. Again, we expect the best, but we do plan for the worst. And so those are the positions where, depending on the impact and depending on whether it's a forward or a rearward sharp movement, that you are the most protected, of course, assuming that you've got your seatbelt buckled, but to ensure that your head, your neck, all of those parts are going to sustain the least amount of movement during any kind of emergency landing. So those are very, very important. And the flight attendants, we have brace positions depending on whether or not you're forward in our particular aircraft or aft. And it's the same reason we are in certain positions that have been carefully researched that will provide us with the safest result, so that we don't sustain, we try to avoid having whiplash or any of those kinds of things. So that's why those positions are printed in the safety cards.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And I'm very sorry, Tracy. Tracy says she can't listen well because she can't stop laughing at Eric. So I take that as a good problem to have.
We all have that problem, though, Tracy. Just
not helping.
Yeah, so we had a couple of questions though about the 301. So I'm just gonna share my screen here. So these two upcoming classes that we're talking about, and hopefully you can see my screen. There we go, perfect. So the one on September 10th is from Phoenix, and the other one in Los Angeles Burbank is on September 17th. And if you go on that page, you would like to know all the flight details before you commit to it, you can do so here. I made both of these available. So for example, let's go to the one in Burbank. It might take a little longer here because I'm sharing it. We've broken it down into 4 easy steps. The first one, if you haven't done so, then you just can get the buy the tuition for the class here. The second one is the Southwest airline tickets, and I'm gonna actually let Eric and Diane say something about why it's a good idea to buy them early, because you might think, oh my god, I got so much time, it's only July 5th right now.
That's what I always do.
Yeah,
Don't do it like I do it. That's what I always do.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do what Eric does. But right now you can see that the fare is literally just 59, or at least when that screenshot was taken, 59 going out from Burbank to Sacramento and then coming back also just 59.
That is really good.
That is a really good fare, especially these days. And then so you would, after you purchase the tuition for the 301 with us, then you head over to southwest.com, you plug in the date and the times for the flights, and then when you're done with that, then you come back here and there's a link to a Southwest Airline code form that we created, and that helps us to get all of the people who are on the flight with us pre-boarded, so to speak, with the station manager there in Burbank or in Phoenix. And then the last step is to register for the pre-flight webinar, and that for if you fly with us on September 17th from Burbank to Sacramento and back, that will be on the 15th. And on the 15th, actually, we're combining our monthly group coaching webinar with the pre-flight webinar for the flight class. So so you kind of get a special treat here, actually. But that's what that looks like, and it's the same for Phoenix, except for different dates, and there's screenshots as well. So if you have any questions, just message us or email us, and we'll help you out. Next question for you, Eric. And that's an interesting question. So is it safe to stay on the same plane that has recently been fixed for a mechanical problem? So is it safe to be on a plane that's recently, had some kind of problem fixed?
That's an easy one, and I'll answer unequivocally, without a doubt, yes, absolutely. The pilots will never accept an airplane that is not fixed airworthy to their satisfaction, and maintenance won't let it go. And this is a case where human motivations are actually working towards the direction of safety, not against it. Because if the pilots can find any excuse to turn the airplane down and not fly it and still get paid, they will. So if the pilots are,
and we'll be encouraging them to do that.
Yes, and they'll be going, are you sure? Really? They did all that? Yeah. So the flight attendants will be cheering them on. So if they're going to stay on the airplane, then yes, it is fixed. And one of our one of our people who we were looking into cause on was actually experienced a high-speed takeoff reject in May, and sent us a question about that, and the airplane went back, and they got a new airplane. And he said after that ride, he said there were only about half of the people that were on the first one getting on the second one, and he was one of them. So good on him. He was listening to our voices, pushing the junk out of his head, but that still took some guts to saddle back up, and they did not get back in the same airplane. That airplane was very sick and went to the doctor's office and probably had a couple of days worth of work. So they got a brand new airplane and left. But yeah, if the pilots are going to go, you can rest assured that whatever it was, and it's nice when they tell you, so you don't just say, oh, a little thing, or we're finishing some paperwork, or we're waiting for maintenance. And if they have some good people skills, they'll tell you what they did. But you can rest assured the airplane's good to go, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess my internal mental dialogue was, well, how does that person even know that something wasn't right in the first place? But you're right. I mean, there are situations where, you know, sometimes you have to go back to the gate. You know, I remember one time it was a light bulb for something that wasn't even terribly important in the grand scheme of things, but apparently it was in the, you know, whatever kind of thing. If it doesn't work, you got to go back, and so they go back, and
and that's part and parcel of with the flight attendants. I mean, we've talked about this. Eric and the guys up in the flight deck, they have their own checklist that they go through, and the flight attendants have a pre-flight checklist that we have to go through. So we are checking lists before passengers ever get near the plane. We have long lists of all the things on the aircraft that we personally have to look at, make sure are present, are operational, and everything else. And so if we find anything that's amiss, we are required to tell the captain. And some of the things are go items that the aircraft, the plane can still go, maybe for one leg. And then there are some items which are no-go items that if I go to the captain and say, sir or ma'am, this is either missing or it's not operational or something, then we're not going either. So it's the entire aircraft has to be perfect in order for us to go anywhere. So
nothing is being MacGyvered.
No, it's a real team effort. I mean, we don't want to go either. The flight attendants don't want to go either unless the plane is perfect.
Yes. And I think, and that's why sometimes, and I'm saying this because some fearful flyers have actually communicated that after they've gotten over their fear flying or worked their way into a place of reflection about it, and it's when you're so afraid, you become really selfish. You know, you don't, and I mean it in the way that it was communicated to us, and that is, you don't really think about the pilot or the flight attendant being human beings that have families, want to go home, want to survive. You know, it's all about you. It's all about me, and what if me, and what if I, and right. So that is one of the hallmarks of that anxiety, basically, that state. It's really not so much about others, it's all about ourselves, right? So speaking about ourselves, Diane, the next question is for you, because comfort is always very important, and it may not have to do with fear of flying per se, but I'm sure others might have wondered that as well. Why is it always so damn cold on the airplane?
Well, the only answer to that is, the other question we get is, why is it always so damn hot on the airplane?
I would have asked that one next.
Well, it's one or the other. I'm just telling you. Part of it is the type of airplane you're flying in. Some of the planes have a very good, I've never flown on one or worked one, very good air conditioning and heating systems, and they manage to have a very even temperature throughout the cabin, from the forward to the aft of the cabin. Part of it, some of the aircraft just don't. They just don't. I worked on so many planes over the last 3+ years that I could be in the back of the plane and be dying. I could be wearing a bathing suit and I would barely be comfortable. And then I could walk forward into the galley and you could hang meat because it was so cold up there. So airplanes do have a tendency to be colder. And when we hear from our passengers, can you have it's really cold, it's really hot, we will call up to the flight deck and ask the captain if he or she can make some kind of adjustment. Sometimes it's possible, a lot of times it isn't. So the bottom line is, when I fly as a passenger, I always have a shawl or a sweater, and I don't care if it's 120 degrees when we leave Phoenix. When you get up in 35,000 feet, it could be cold. And so we do, when passengers get on and they're wearing shorts and a sleeveless t-shirt and they say, do you have blankets? And I think, we haven't had blankets for decades, basically. So, well, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but not for a while. And so do prepare that way. I mean, be comfortable, but bring layers, because we can't always adjust the temperature to your specific specifications. Because if you're hot, maybe the person who's sitting next to you is cold, and we just can't please. On my planes, we can't please 65 people, and on the big ones, we can't necessarily please 200. So
I'll jump in on the back of that if it's okay. And
please.
The old days, new days, and it's the temperature controlling is much better now and much more accurate on the new airplanes. But in the old airplane, the 737 FO would be flying like this for the whole trip with his hand up on the air cycle machine control switch, because they'd be calling him and he'd go, it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too hot, it's too cold. And you might as well just leave your arm up there instead of waste the energy and putting it up and down every couple seconds. And if it got really bad with the flight attendants, we'd say, okay, if they were, one of them could call you, and then 30 seconds later, a different one will call you and tell you the other thing. So he'd say, okay, if you guys are going to do this, you're going to have to elect a temperature chairperson, and we will only talk to the temperature chairperson about the temperature. We will not handle conflicting opinions. That was point one. Point two, the flight attendants are working sometimes real hard. And you're
all the time we're working real hard.
All the time they're working really hard, and you're trying to sleep. They're zoned out. They got a 400-pound liquor cart they're pushing up and down and handing out stuff all over us. And they got their uniform and an apron on top of that and everything else. So A, they're dressed for it, and B, they're working. But I did notice it was interesting when I went from the 737 to the Airbus. The Airbus has this selector in the back on the flight attendant panel, and we would set the temperature in the cockpit, and the flight attendants could adjust the temperature just 2 Celsius up or 2 Celsius down from the set temperature. And when they got their own knob and could adjust the temperature by themselves, we would rarely get a call about the temperature. Right. Even though the passengers might still have been freezing, the flight attendants had their own knobs, so we didn't have to mess with knobs anymore.
And that does determine, I mean, it's dependent upon the aircraft. And I will tell you a secret. I will tell everybody out there is a secret. And that is, if you come to a flight attendant on maybe one of our aircraft that doesn't really have that much sensitivity as far as the pilots being able to adjust it, and you say, can you please ask the captain or to make it a little warmer or colder, I'll say, sure, absolutely. And I will go to the front, I'll call the flight deck, and I'll say, sir, ma'am, I said, one of the passengers said it's really too cold back here. And he or she will say, well, I can't do anything about it. And I'll say, I know that, but I want the passenger to see that I'm calling you. So that's very evil on our part, but it's
well,
we are bearing all. We are telling the absolute truth on what exactly happens. So I'm just faking it. I'm usually asking him how much longer we're going to be. And
we'll ask later if it was too hot or too cold on that 14.5-hour leg. I'd be real curious to know or if it changed en route for that long of a leg.
Yeah, that's something.
Well, and also I'm sure there's differences to the front and the back of the aircraft.
Oh, yeah.
But as Jim pointed out, he's pretty sure that Ron has a blanket, and I'm pretty sure that Ron has a blanket too.
Yeah, I'm not even going to say it. I'm not even going to say it.
So,
Anyway,
and
what's the next?
yeah, well, here's it's another one of those that fall under the heading of catastrophic thinking. And we actually discussed that question before we came on here. And it's for you, Eric. And it's, what happens to the airplane if both pilots get ill or injured in flight? So,
Well,
take it away, Eric.
To quote my second most favorite movie, Princess Bride, that's almost inconceivable, where you would have both of them so incapacitated that neither one of them could fly the airplane. And if it's a big wide body over water thing or long leg, there's spare pilots assigned to the crew for crew duty rotation in often the crew hidey hole or bunk or something like that. But generally, if that came to pass, there are quite often company deadheading employees that are riding in the back to be moved from one place to another. And the pilots, and the flight attendants know where they are and who they are. They know that. And often they're on vacation. They're just employees riding around on vacation. They're in the back somewhere and they know them and know where they are. So if that came up, which would be the equivalent of flipping a quarter repeatedly until you got it to land on the side instead of heads or tails, which I guess could happen if you flipped it enough. There would be almost for sure resources in the back of the airplane to help you. It's kind of like medical emergencies in 32 years or whatever. I don't know how many I had where we had an ill passenger or something, and we would make a PA and say, is there a doctor or medical person on board? And never did I have a flight where there wasn't, and never did I have a flight where they were hesitant to volunteer to get up and help out.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we discussed this before, the odds of there being a pilot in the back are much higher than two pilots at the same time being so incapacitated that they could not, pilot the aircraft. So, but that's what catastrophic thinking is all about. And it's it's really, really, it doesn't stop. And so that's one of the questions that invariably will come up. Well, what if both pilots can't, So it's just in the realm of, I think from the U.S., wasn't it, it's more likely that one of you in the U.S. will become the next president than to die in an airplane crash in the U.S. or any tier 1 country.
Yeah.
That's courtesy of our doctorate and professor MIT of statistics at MIT, whose name will come to me after we get off.
Dr. Arnold Barnett.
Yes, Dr. Barnett. And Dr. Barnett built a pyramid of things that are much more likely than dying in the plane crash, and those include winning the presidency, having a chest full of Olympic gold medals, all manner of just pie in the sky craziness. Yeah.
So, all right. So last one for you, Diane. It's a good one. What do I do if the seatbelt sign is on and I really have to use the washroom? So,
very good question. And it happens all the time, at least once, twice, 6 times, whatever, for every flight I've ever been on. Even on short ones, when you go up to Flagstaff and you go up and down and it's like, going to the mall. You can get up. What it's there's a really funny video. If you ever see Kay and Peele, if you Google Kay and Peele, those are two comedians about that, and it's hilarious. But you can get up and use the restroom. However, caveat, asterisk, there are times when we really, I will ask, where the other flight attendant will, is this an emergency? If it's turbulent, there's, sometimes the seatbelt sign is on when we're getting ready to land, just shortly after we've taken off, that sort of thing. And it's not turbulent. But if it's turbulent and the captain has turned the seatbelt sign on, we really, really, really want you to stay seated and buckled up, because the risk to you walking down the aisle is actually in some ways much greater than it is for a flight attendant. We know what we're doing. We know what to do when it gets bounced. We practice that. But for a and we have sea legs, I guess you'd have to put it that way. But for passengers, that's not necessarily the case. Also, when we are getting ready to land, when we are in our initial descent or final descent, and then shortly after we take off, those are the two periods that are the most critical phases of flight. And then we really want everybody to stay buckled up. A good rule is, if we're buckled up and the flight attendants are buckled up, then everybody needs to be buckled up. Having said that, I have had occasions when it has been an emergency and a passenger turns around, or they're already in the aisle, and then I will have to get out of my jump seat, and so the passenger can get to the lav, let the captain know that we have someone up in the aisle going to the lav. So there's a lot of things we have to do to let the flight deck know what's going on in the back. I had one, just as for instance, I hadn't been flying more than a year, and someone had to use the lav, and I was already buckled up in my jump seat, and I said to him, "Is it emergency?" And he said, "Yes." And I got up and I stood my jump seat. Before he walked in the lav, I said, if you are still in the lavatory when we are getting ready to land and the wheels come down, I said, I am getting in my jump seat and sitting, and you are in the lavatory until we get to the gate. Do you understand? And he said, yes. And that's exactly what happened. He was there through, and I had to file a irregular operations report and that sort of thing. But so there are some consequences, but if it's an emergency, yeah, we'll accommodate you. Yeah.
Wow, that's an interesting way to finish out a flight, I guess.
It really was. In fact, we landed. We were taxiing to the gate. I'm sitting in my jump seat, which is, and my plane is directly in front of the lavatory door, and I'm all harnessed up and buckled. And keep in mind that we are not allowed as flight attendants to unbuckle our seatbelts until that seatbelt sign light is off. We cannot do that. It's an FAA thing. And so when all the passengers are unbuckling and they're looking at us like, why aren't you getting up? We can't. We literally can't do that. Anyway, so we're taxiing in, and the door opens in back of me, and I look up and this guy's looking down at me. I said, still not at the gate. So he shut the door, closed back up, stuffed himself back in the lav until we got to the gate. The light went off and I could get out of my jump seat. So
wow. Jim actually mentioned, Jim mentioned that somebody used the lav on a flight that he was on while they were taxiing. So I guess it does happen more often than
when, and that's another instance. We may be taxiing, or a lot of times we land, we're in the alley, we're close to our gate, but we can't get to our gate because there's another aircraft there. We are still on an active taxiway, and we all have to stay buckled up. If someone has to get up, what I have to do is I will have to call the flight deck and say, sir, ma'am, I have someone up in the aisle. And then I will, so they know to not move the plane. Right. And then the individual will get up, use the lav, go back to a seat. I will walk forward and watch it. I will visualize to make sure that they have buckled their seatbelt. I go back to my seat, buckle up, call the flight deck and say, cabin secure again. And then we can move. So.
Wow. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you, both of you. I think well, our audience is a better judge, but I think we did a okay job tonight. And if you liked this Q&A format, and thank you Tracy and Sharon for putting the comment in that you found it very helpful. I'm going to encourage you that next week, put us to the test and actually ask the questions that you have live on the show, and we'll be answering them. So don't worry though if there's no questions. We got a bunch, but for tonight, thank you so much, Diane, and thank you so much, Eric. And let's do this again next week. What do you say?
Great fun.
Sounds good. See you guys.